it's Lacey here, Lacey, the super basic bitch. I love pumpkin lattes and I love Friends and Stranger Things. And this is
Hi, I'm Dave, and I like Stranger Things and Friends too, and pretty much all media. And I love trivia about movies and TV shows and everything.
right. And it's great that we have this podcast together because here on Stranger Things, nope, sorry, Stranger Friends, me and Dave, what we do is we take an episode of Stranger Things and an episode of Friends and talk about them and compare and contrast both of these things. So, this episode is focusing on the episode where what we're going to do is we're going to start with Friends. And if you've never listened to us before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of, let's talk about the episode, start to finish, what's going on. And Dave here is going to help us connect the dots and add his little 2 cents. So, this particular episode of Friends that we're talking about is season 4, episode 12. It is the one with the embryos.
The director was Kevin Bright, written by David Crane and Monica Kaufman, and it stars Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox and Lisa Kudrow and Matt LeBlanc and Matthew Perry and David Schwimmer and Giovanni Ribisi and Deborah Jo Rupp, make appearances. You may remember Deborah Jo Rupp from That 70s Show. She plays Kitty in That 70s Show. Giovanni Ribisi has been in lots of movies,
Lots of
including
movies, including the
including
one,
Boiler Room and
yes,
Avatar and Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow and Saving Private Ryan.
perfect. So when this scene opens, we are met in the kitchen. Um, Joey, Chandler, Ross sitting around. We have Monica and Rachel going through it's like a grocery bag. Rachel has just come from the grocery store. Phoebe has been in contact with her brother to be a surrogate for her brother and his wife, Alice. And so that's where the embryo part of the thing comes in, but we're going to put that aside for right now. We have all of the friends in the kitchen. The boys have claimed that they know more about the girls than the girls know about them. And oh, just chaos ensues. So the guys guess everything that's in Rachel's shopping bag, which is tape, soda, yogurt, half-eaten cookies, and apples.
So the surrogate mother story arc was written especially for Lisa Kudrow because she was really pregnant with her son Julian. And related to that, you'll notice in the first scene, Lisa Kudrow is wearing a red coat and Courtney Cox is wearing a red sweater while Jennifer Aniston is wearing a white shirt. It's because Courtney Cox was secretly pregnant, but then miscarried.
Wow, that is a sad, interesting tidbit of knowledge. Thank you, Dave. So,
It's very interesting.
yes. Um this now it is important to note at the very beginning of the episode, Monica and Rachel had been woken up by Chandler and Joey's pet chicken, and they eventually somehow get into a trivia match against each other, Chandler and Joey versus Rachel and Monica, for the possession of Monica's apartment. So it was Monica's apartment versus getting rid of the chickens. Um, Anything to note about that?
Well, I just think it's very interesting that there's a subplot about a chicken, which of course lays eggs alongside Lisa Kudrow, who is laying eggs in this episode.
So,
Also,
speak.
uh, uh, there's a mention by Chandler's father, by Chandler about his father, that he was in an all-male review called Viva Las Vegas. And this, along with Lisa Kudrow later in the episode, talking to the eggs in a petri dish, were considered by David Crane in later interviews to be very risky for broadcast television at the time. And they were sort of treated by cultural critics as harbingers of a shifting cultural landscape in television.
That is such an interesting bit of knowledge, Dave.
Thank you.
So, during the rest of that episode, the boys win the trivia match, and they are required to switch apartments. Oops. They want to switch apartments, but Rachel's very adamant not to leave. But then in the end, Phoebe does get pregnant. Like, she does get pregnant with Frank and Alice's embryos. And yeah, they just kind of forget that they were fighting over the apartment. And yeah, the boys move into Monica's apartment. And Monica and Rachel are grossed out by having to be in Joey and Chandler's apartment. So that is that episode of Friends, season 4, episode 12.
You mentioned that Phoebe has second thoughts about being the surrogate mother for her brother and his much older wife. And originally, the writers were going to write her as choosing to not be the surrogate mother, but because of the Viva Las Vegas joke, the NBC executive said that they had to throw a little red meat to conservatives in the audience. So she did ultimately was rewritten to have having chosen life. This was not the only episode that the deeply traditional producers seeded with moral messages like choosing life and abstaining from gambling. Friends was often a subversively traditional and conservative show in a time of political correctness run amok.
Were there any more, because you've watched the episode too, Dave, were there any things that stuck out to you during the episode itself? Any moments?
Well, you can notice that Matthew Perry is wearing what looks like a Cuban style shirt, like you might see Cubanos wear in Miami. And that's because Matthew Perry's wardrobe was meticulously designed to underscore the fact that it and everything else about him are completely unbearable.
I agree. I heard that he was kind of a nightmare on the set during a few.
And also in real life, everyone says that he's a complete piece of shit in real life. Just absolutely unbearable to be around.
But I don't care. I love Matthew Perry because he's on my favorite show, Friends. Therefore, by proxy, I am a fan. I stan.
So any other thoughts, Lacey, about this episode of Friends?
Yeah. So my comments is when Rachel is showing and the boys are guessing, all the items in her shopping bag. My thing is, who goes to the supermarket to buy Scotch tape? That's obviously a craft store item. Or
I don't know.
even a
Sometimes
Dollar
I buy
Tree.
Scotch tape from the supermarket. They have office supply aisles at the supermarket.
But for her, and diet soda. It was diet soda. Yep, diet soda, yogurt, half-eaten cookies, which she had already eaten, I guess, apples and tape. I also
You know
found
that some Hobby Lobbies actually sell diet soda next to their cash registers.
Oh, that's true. My next moment that stood out was Alice, the actress that played Alice. What was her name again, Dave?
That is
The one from that
that is
70s show?
Deborah Jo Rupp, who is probably most famous for playing Kitty in that 70s show.
Yeah, it was very weird to see her as like a young person when she was probably the same age as she was when she played Kitty in that 70s show. That 70s show didn't air that long after Friends, I don't think. But
Friends
so
was definitely a launching ground for the careers of many other stars of television and occasionally movies.
also, Chandler is scared of Lord of the Dance.
That is correct.
Mm-hmm. And
And Rachel's favorite film is Weekend at Bernie's.
so my final note is that who wagers an apartment against a chicken?
A terrible gambling addict, which, as I mentioned before, the producers, in order to appease the more conservative elements of the audience, uh, made to include choosing life as a moral theme and abstaining from gambling as a moral theme of the episode.
Well, perfect. Well, now we move on to our Stranger Things episode.
But before we do, let's do a quick ad read.
Oh, perfect. Hey, listeners, is your life so sad and anxiety inducing that you pine for simpler times? Specifically, the 80s and the 90s? Sure, it is, because you're listening to a podcast about friends and Stranger Things. But do you need something more concrete in your sad little apartment or hellishly overpriced McMansion to remind you of those halcyon days of the twilight of the 20th century? Phonebooks.com is your one-stop shop for old phone books, out-of-print phone books, even new phone books. Yes, they're still making them in 2020 with the internet existing in everything. You can order phone books a la carte or for a low monthly subscription price of $6.99. Have an outdated phone book delivered right to your door inside a plastic wrapper that doesn't do a goddamn thing to keep it dry. Sign up now at phonebooks.com/strangerfriends for 10% off your first delivery and let a heavy, soggy phone book in your hands remind you of what happiness used to feel like.
All right, so our Stranger Things episode is Stranger Things Season 2, Chapter 6, The Spy. It was directed by Andrew Stanton and written by the Duffer Brothers. It stars Winona Ryder and David Harbour and Finn Wolfhard and Millie Bobby Brown and Gaten Matarazzo and Caleb McLaughlin and Noah Schnapp and Sadie Sink and Natalia Dwyer and Charlie Heaton and Joe Keery and Dacre Montgomery and Car Buono and Sean Astin and Paul Reiser and Brett Gelman and Helen Abel and Brian Brightman and Christopher Charles and Joe Davison and Priya Ferguson and Sheena Karasmi and Mary Kraft and Brian LaFontaine and Wendell A. Matthews and Brandon Odell and Vince Pisani and Michael Sheenfeld as Riff Soldier number 2.
Oh, Riff Soldier number 2. He did so good in that role. So, as all of you know, I've watched every episode of Stranger Things like 10 times. The Spy is that one in season 2 that it just grabs you. It grabs you right in.
And this is a great episode for showcasing a very popular fan theory that the producers of both Friends and Stranger Things have been very coy about, and that's that Friends and Stranger Things are part of a shared cinematic universe, with Mad About You being the connecting linchpin between the two. Paul Reiser is the linchpin that connects the Friends, Mad About You, Stranger Things shared universe.
Yeah, I used to think it was a very hokey theory, but I really dove into the lore. And after watching that episode again, after you telling me this, Dave, I'm a changed person. I now believe that they are in the same universe. And yeah, like it kind of blew my
And
mind a little bit.
it is speculated and is so well articulated, perhaps even canonical, to the point of being canonical, that Lisa Kudrow traveled back in time and gave birth to all the kids in Stranger Things using just the eggs from the couple in the Friends episode.
It just makes sense. Some things just make sense, and this is just one of those things. I also it kind of it wonders because I do apologize, Dave. I've lost my train of thought.
Well, that's fine. At one point, and here's something even more mind blowing. It may have a connection. Stranger Things may have a connection to yet another popular science fiction franchise. At one point, Steve is carrying a very menacing looking bat, and if you rearrange the letters in Steve, you can spell Negan. Coincidence? Just something to
Not
think
at all.
about.
Yeah, not at all, Dave. I too saw Lucille as soon as he picked it up, and I was saying, could Steve be younger Rick? A younger Rick Grimes. Do they eat, Steve
Well,
Harrington, Rick Grimes?
Well, that might be the fake out actually of this theory. Is it makes you think he's a young Negan, but he's actually a young Rick.
Yes, exactly. So when we open the scene, Will is going into the hospital. A frantic Winona Ryder, who I think has probably spent more time screaming and asking, "What's going on? I don't know what's going on," than any other words in the entire series. I think if I think then they do a run counter of the top 10 words that Winona Ryder says, and like I don't know what's going on is them.
It's definitely up there. It's definitely up there. But Winona Ryder is she's very committed to method acting. Well, not a lot of people know this about her. As a matter of fact, during the scene in the boardroom with the scientists, Winona Ryder, to get into character, actually studied Faye Dunaway's boardroom scene from Mommy Dearest. And Ryder was so committed to the method acting that the director of the episode had to keep reminding her that yelling, "Don't fuck with me, fellas," was not actually a line of dialogue for the scene.
Yeah, she's so method. That scene is so beautiful. Her in that boardroom slamming her fists on the table. What's wrong with my boy? It was very pivoting. Um,
It's a real tour de force
yeah,
performance.
you really get a really good glimpse of Paul Reiser's double chin in this scene, as it is just stark side profile of Paul Reiser.
And speaking of method acting and committing to the role and double chins, I just think it's very brave of Sean Astin to have put on weight for this role.
And again, and I did make that note. Sean Astin as Bob is probably one of the best parts of season 2, one of my favorites. And yeah, it is brave. It's kind of like when Jared Leto gained all that weight for that one role. So we have Will in the hospital, um, but on the other side, we have the other friends, not Mike and Will, the two that are just like, what are their names again? Those two friends are out. They've formed a bond with Steve Harrington. They have the girl with them now. and they're trying to
Not
fight
not
off.
the hotter older girl, but the
No,
sort of
not
unkempt younger white trash girl.
correct. And they're all in a bus and trying to fight demon dogs, dog demons, like dogs with like demigorgon mouths.
These dog creatures actually were also given birth by Lisa Kudrow using the eggs from Frank and Alice. Pretty incredible.
It's astounding. um so
You want to hear something else that'll blow your mind?
yes. Please.
Jonathan kind of looks like a young Norman Reedus. Coincidence?
I did have written down, why does Jonathan Byers look like a 40-year-old crack addict? Oh, goodness, we're not professional. So, Will is in the hospital. He's told them, all of these people, that they need to go into these tunnels under the city. It turns out to be a trap, and that, all these people die in the tunnel, and it actually opens the upside down. So Will did this, and so Mike, immediately catching on that Will is the spy, runs to go warn, but Winona Ryder, while it took Mike 2 seconds to figure out what's going on, Winona Ryder still doesn't know. She's screaming, "What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?" And everybody, and it's too late. Things are going down south. I also have written down that Steve is so hot, he looks like such a badass.
Well, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Themes of being underground and the subterranean run through the entire series. For instance, Jonathan and Nancy are visiting some sort of malcontent who lives in a basement or some sort of missile silo or something. And he's depicted as being a little bit of a creep. But actually, in the 80s, subterranean couples retreat counselor for teenagers was actually an extremely well-respected and high-paying career, and not as seedy as the show is making it look with its contemporary standards of morality.
That's very true. They have him making him look like an insane person. But, I mean, in fact, that was a very high sought-after position back then.
But I don't see anything insane about helping trying to facilitate living in a bunker and trying to facilitate sex between 2 teenage guests that I'm sure he had no intention of videotaping.
The only other note I have on this episode, or I have 2. I have that there's a moment where Steve is talking to Dustin on the train tracks, acting like, and Dustin's asking about girls. And then talking about like sexual urges, like with the 12-year-olds. That was a weird. That's a weird moment. And then the video feed of the tunnel, the tunnel that they all go down to. It looks like colonoscopy footage. And so there's actually a bit of trivia out there that's actually footage from Paul Reiser's recent colonoscopy.
It's so nice to see TV shows still know how to use practical and photographic effects
And you got to
instead of
give the
doing all
Duffer Brothers
CGI.
credit for this, you know?
Of course, there's some CGI in there, but they start from a basis of practical and photographic effects in homage to the filmmaking techniques of the 1980s.
Do you have any more thoughts?
Did we cover Lisa Kudrow going back in time and giving birth to the flower-faced dog creatures?
Yes.
Well, that's all I've got to say about Season 2, Chapter 6, The Spy. Part of the Friends, Mad About You, Stranger Things, Walking Dead, shared cinematic universe.
Well, perfect. Well, guys, that ends this episode of Stranger Things titled The One That Makes No Sense. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I don't know how to end a podcast, so I guess we just end it like this.